Welcome to the Spotlight On series, where we get to sit down and speak to some of the most inspirational market leaders from some of the UK's most exciting brands. We'll learn about their careers, their challenges, and their achievements, all to inspire you to help you grow your careers. Welcome to this episode of Spotlight On series, and we're here with Matthew Ashton from Stanhope.
Good morning.
Hello. So to get started then, so why don't we start with you, your role, and a bit about Stanhope.
Yeah, so my name is Matthew. I work for Stanhope Insurance. We're a specialist high-value home brokerage. So we look after people that own quite a lot of assets. So we insure their homes, life insurance, private medical, but we really love doing jewellery, watches, art collections, and that's a large part of what we do. It's a real niche in the market. Yeah, okay. And so I'm one of the directors at the business, and particularly look after the marketing, as well as new business, and also a little bit around culture and making sure we've got the right culture for the business.
Cool. Okay, so tell me a little bit about sort of Stanhope's journey today, because obviously you've been there pretty much since day dot.
Yes.
What's sort of happened over the last sort of few years for you?
Yeah, so there's two parts, I guess, to the journey. So Stanhope Cooper, the first part of the brokerage started about 15 years ago, but that's Stanhope Cooper. Stanhope Insurance started in October 2019. So it's still relatively new. Yep. And I was fortunate enough to be part of the core team to set that up, cool. Which is a mixture of being in the right place at the right time, knowing the right people, and a bit of hard work along the way.
Amazing. So that's not a super rare opportunity or sort of super unique situation, but how did you find yourself in a situation where you were able to be part of a founding team? What led to that point?
Well, so in my previous career, I was working with someone and they weren't really keen on me going out of the office to external events. And so I was stuck in the office, but like the parable of the persistent widower, I was like, let me get out. And so I think they relented, and I had the fortunate opportunity of going to London on a high net worth insurance brokerage training day. And so there was probably a period of 6 months where I was just relentlessly trying to get out the office. That day happened, and it so happened that on that day I met one of the other directors at Stanhope Cooper, and we got talking, got on really well, and as you do, as people do, they then reach out after the event, and we got talking, and lo and behold, they wanted to set up something similar to the company that I was working for before, with a bit different edge and some nuances, but some similarities, and it sounded too good to be true. Particularly, they asked if I would be on the core team to help set it up, and usual imposter syndrome kicks in. But and then you doubt, don't you? You think, if it's too good to be true, it probably is. Yeah. So you're kind of really cautious, but actually ended up being everything that they said it was. So that was a lady called Rachel Living and Will Cooper, and then we eventually started in the August 2019. And we launched and started trading in the end of October that year. So
just before the pandemic.
Just before, great time to start a business. But actually, for us, like every obstacle can be an opportunity. It actually ended up being an amazing opportunity for a high net worth broker because, first of all, we didn't have any renewals to look after, so we could just focus on new business. But also during the pandemic, a lot of high net worth individuals who would previously ask personal assistants or other staff to do their insurances suddenly thought, I've got the time to do it myself. So they started shopping around. So it caused this whole mass market looking online who had been stuck with an existing broker or product for many years, just paying their renewal, didn't have time to look at it, suddenly going, So one particular case, I remember it to the day, he was paying £15,000 a year for his home insurance. We took his details, and I had to call him first before one of the staff team did to prepare him that his premium is only £4,000. But actually, that's not because we've done anything wrong. It's just that he's been paying way too much for many years, and so we had lots of people like that. So it created an amazing opportunity.
So it sounds like interestingly, maybe some of your personality traits of being hungry for certain opportunities, going out, putting yourself out there.
Yeah.
combined with a little bit of chance and on sort of who you met at the time led to kind of like the situation you're in now, would you say?
Yeah, totally. I mean, in life you can't be passive, can you? You have to be active, and then opportunities create themselves. I think you can actively wait for something, or you can passively wait for something. I think if you passively wait, you're basically sat there, like a lot of people I know, just waiting for people to knock at their door for opportunities. Or you can actively wait, where you want to do something, but you can put yourself in the right places and positions to bring about those opportunities. And it's no different with the pandemic. You can go, "Oh, I'm going to be passive here, woe is us," or you can go, no, where's the opportunity and what can I do? And then whether that's your career, whether that's business, whether that's marketing online, whatever it is, I think the principle is the same.
I think that's good. Some profound messaging right there as well. So I guess for some people, putting yourself out there or being open and sort of proactive to certain things might not necessarily come naturally. Have you always been sort of maybe an extrovert, or have you always been sort of that outward-facing mindset, or is it something that you've kind of built throughout your career and
Good
developed?
question. I think growing up, I grew up around the world, so I went to about 8 different schools growing up, and so I was never physically the strongest, and so for me to protect myself on the playground, it was all to do with words. How do I position myself outside of conflict or whatever? So I think I learned very quickly to spot the opportunity and then use words to perhaps take myself out, and also use humor a lot to, kind of bring resolution if you feel there's conflict. So I spent some time in Seattle working as a church pastor, believe it or not, before going into insurance. But life also just throws you blows to the stomach, and it can wind you. So I know what it's like to be out of a job. I know what it's like to be redundant. I know what it's like to be living with family, with kids, and not knowing what next looks like. And so I think that can either do one of two things. You can either, again, so for a season there's a season of kind of despair. What's going on? I don't know. But with the right support around, I think that's slowly turned into, I've got to do something here. I've got to sink my teeth into something. So now looking on, I think those parts of life, they season you. So I know what it's like not to have work. I know what it's like to be maybe, I know what it's like to feel low because I don't have satisfaction from work or other things. So when an opportunity does come, I want to make the most of it. So a quick example might be people in the office will say, there's so much work to do, I'm overwhelmed. And you say, well, turn that around, what a blessing. I mean, you've got work to do. That's amazing, because I know what it's like not to have work to do. And actually, I'd rather have the stress of too much than the stress of not knowing where my work's coming from.
So would you say then that certainly now, would you say you're quite a resilient person?
Am I resilient? Yeah, I guess so. Yeah, I guess you have to be. But I think resilient isn't. I think often people confuse resilience with a sense of assertive aggressiveness, and I don't think that. I think resilience is more like an anchor on a ship. You don't know it's there, but something's tying the ship in place while the storm's coming. And so I think resilience is something that's internal. You need to have an anchor. And I think the key to that is you need to not find your ultimate meaning in life from your work. Because when it's going well, you can become prone to arrogance. But when it goes really bad, you can be prone to despair and perhaps depression.
It's that balance of basically work-life balance.
Absolutely. Something outside of work needs to anchor you. And whatever that is, faith, friendships, family, something else needs to anchor you so that you can be free in your work, to be the best version of you that you can. Otherwise, it'll suffocate you, and you'll be prone to arrogance or despair.
Another profound messaging. When we spoke before, you sort of mentioned, like, quite early on in your career, you did sort of a lot of work that was around rejection handling. So
yes.
Has that sort of potentially fed into being able to build resilience? Has it fed into like the success of your role at the moment? Like, how important is rejection handling?
Good question. Yeah, so my previous vocation as a youth minister, so I did a little bit in insurance before, and I went and did I studied theology, did youth work, and then did church work. And so for large parts of my career, I'm preaching a gospel message to someone who has perhaps no understanding of what faith is. So the idea of how to understand what the person's objections will be, it's just formed part of my pathway. That's no different in the insurance brokerage world, So yes, a large part of what we do is always being on the forefront of handling objections. I think the key difference is, so I think you've got to discern a rejection is different to an objection. A rejection is, no mate, I'm not going out with you for dinner tonight. It's not going to happen. So that's a rejection. You can't handle that. Respectfully turn away. An objection is, well, I'm not sure, I'm not sure what I'm doing tonight. So that's an objection. And so through the use of words, you can find out what's causing the perhaps lack of certainty to want to go out, and then you can. And things, we're all in the business of moving people. Daniel H. Pink has a lot to say about it in his kind of book, some really helpful resources. But we're all in the business of moving people, whether we're, on the phones to someone, asking them to behave differently, whether we're sat next to a peer who's feeling a little bit low, whether we're at home and we want burger for dinner instead of a healthy salad. We're all in the business of moving people, and our words are really important on how we can do that.
That's a nice wordsmith way of saying be quite good at sales, or sales is part of your everyday life, perhaps?
Yeah, it is. And I think, it is. And I think the word sales has a bit of a negative connotation.
Does, yeah.
We often think of, someone with a short sleeve white shirt, trying to flog an old Ford Focus in the 1980s, and that's someone perhaps in the 1980s, before an internet age. The seller had all the information and power, the buyer had very little. But now in a post-internet age, the buyer often has as much power as the seller because we can have access to the data and information. So I don't think it's as much about selling anymore, because that dynamic has shifted. It is more about wordsmithing. So our craft are our words, and how I construct a sentence, the power, emphasis, the pitch, the inflection will change the way that you think about what I'm saying. And if I can do that persuasively, not in a manipulative way, because that's not good, but in a way that actually communicates what I'm trying to say, hey, you'll at least be willing to listen to me, even if you don't agree. And I think that's an important skill set to have.
Couldn't agree more.
Yeah.
Thinking back to career development, maybe a lot of people watching this will be, might be early on into their careers. What's important to you when you're working with different people throughout their points within their career? What are you trying to coach people when they're sort of just starting out versus perhaps when they're in the middle of their career? Is there different things that people should be focusing on?
Yeah,
Tough question.
It is a tough question, I think, because you need to unpack that specifically depending on the audience you're talking to. So in terms of whether you're talking to a millennial or a baby boomer or a generation, whatever the case might be, because we all see the world slightly differently. But I think an overarching kind of 100,000 foot in the air some principles. I think the first one is grit. I think as a society, or the people that we employ, grittiness isn't something that people tend to have anymore.
What is grittiness?
So it's that, like sticking to the road. We've seen the grit trucks out recently. I've been driving behind them and salt's flashing at your, you can't stand it, but it's helping the tire stick to the road. I think in your career, you've got to stick to the path. Don't get put off by the first slip that you feel along the way, but you've got to be gritty. And so that means you're going to have a tough moment. It means your boss is going to pick you up and say, that's a poor bit of work. It means that you're going to let yourself down. Perhaps you didn't act in a way that you wanted to. It means you'll miss something, but stick to the path, because you can't swipe left and swipe right for a career. It's built over a long period of time, and you've got to be gritty. So the first thing I would say is be full of grit. The second thing I would say is maybe slightly controversial, I don't know, but the whole Beyonce song, independent woman, whatever it was, I think it's a load of nonsense, because no one can truly live an independent life. You can't experience beauty independently, joy, relationships or success. But at the same time, you don't want dependent people. And this is often what I find, particularly with boys that can shave, we call them in the office, boys in their late 20s, early 30s that still in the evenings, rather than read books and invest in their careers, are playing video games and trying to get onto the next level. This is but when their career goes wrong, it's everyone else's fault. They're dependent. Everyone else is responsible. It's not me. So the other top tip is we want something in the middle, which is interdependency, which is I'm fully responsible for my work. It's on me. I'm responsible for my career. It's on me. But I realize I can't fully achieve that without the help of other people. So I am slightly dependent on others. And so there's an interdependency. So I think, grit, second, you've got to be interdependent. Take responsibility, but realize you can't do it on your own. which then thirdly leads on to, I think, joyfulness. I think we've just got to find joy, So happiness and joyfulness, I see them as different things. Happiness is a response to a moment, but joyfulness is something that's deep within. In my previous career as a church pastor, I would do funerals, and you could, at a funeral, be interacting with someone that's full of joy, because despite the setting that they're in, there's something deeper going on. They're celebrating a person's life, for example. So joy isn't circumstantial, it's a choice. And one thing we do at Stanhope is say, choose joy, like turn it around, see that, say if you've got too much work, great, I've got a job, I've got this difficulty, great, I can learn something new. And so grit, interdependency, and joy are kind of the three.
I guess that is quite interesting as well, because I guess the joy side of things could also be conflicting with the grit side of things, right? Because obviously if you're in a situation where you're genuinely not joyful, or if you're not enjoying work, if it's sort of getting a bit too stressful and you don't see a route forward, obviously at Impression we always encourage people that they've got to be selfish to some degree. They've got to make sure that whatever they do, they're passionate about. And if that's not here, or if that's not in the role that they're doing, or in the industry that they're in, it's really important for people to go out and find that.
Totally.
Well, the other thing that you kind of touched on there, which I think ties in quite nicely to the conversation we had before this, was the importance of a good boss.
Yeah.
So in the middle sort of point you spoke around there is interdependency. How reliant is someone's career on having a good boss or mentor at any stage of it?
Good question. I think just to touch back on the previous thing, that does link to that. The other thing is that people have too short a vision for their lives. What am I doing in the next 2 or 3 years? And I think the reason why people don't have joy is because they're not thinking, when I'm 40, how do I see my life? Picture it, vision it. And so reverse engineer. If I'm 40 and I see it as X, what decisions can I make today? So if I do have a momentary problem or affliction, I can say, actually, is that keeping me en route to the bigger vision? And if it is, I can still be full of joy. So again, it goes back to that anchor thing. I think we as, and it links to good bosses, you've got to create vision, help people to create a vision for their life that is holistic and not just primarily work related. I think, and that's tough, by the way, because people are cynical of that. But also, I don't think we live in quite an instant society to have I'm turning 40 this year, and if you'd have told me at age 20 you have a vision for your 40-year-old self, I've been like, you're off your rocker, But now I've got to have a vision for my 60-year-old self, and what does that look like when my kids are teenagers, or perhaps I'm a grandfather, and so what decisions can I make today with that in mind? And I've got to think that way. And I want our staff and my colleagues to think that way. In terms of a good boss, the thing is about a good boss is you don't realize they're a good boss often until you remove from them for a year or two and look back and reflect on the situation. So in my previous career, I had a boss who was he good? Great. I'm not really sure. It depends how you define good. He was relentless. He's the most driven guy I've known. Had very little empathy. The whole world you saw through an objective lens. And I found that really hard because I'm full of empathy. And maybe that stabled me out a little bit. But he was incredibly good because you always knew where you stood with this person. And his name was Andrew. Sadly, no longer with us. He died in his mid-50s, really tragically. But yeah, he taught me a lot. Make sure the objective is clear. Stay on track. Don't get mission drift, and keep going. And he taught me a lot. I've also worked under leaders where I've learned I don't want to do it that way, and insecure leadership is really poor. People who don't know who they are, and they project that over to the staff members and colleagues, and that creates and breeds an insecurity, and that's not helpful too. But we're really blessed at Stanhope. I mean, Will Cooper, the MD, he sets an amazing tone of security, of humility, and that frees us up, really to be able to look at mistakes and own them and go, got that wrong, but also to celebrate wins without getting too high. And I think, he's fantastic at setting that tone.
Cool. So the short side of that is
sorry.
No, absolutely not. It's the importance is that you need to find someone that you can learn from and kind of evolve yourself from, like whoever that may be.
Totally. I think just a final point actually on that is, and often, but not in a consumeristic way. So like, again, because that can feed often into our culture, which is I need to look to somebody else to feed my career, to lead me, to help me in terms of, but actually I think it's the same like when I linking back to my previous role and still do now when it comes to marital advice, particularly when I talk to young men, is rather than write a list on what you want your spouse to look like, write a list on who you want to be to that person. So I'm not, otherwise so what happens, that changes the way you see it. So if you want, what do you want from a good boss? Rather than looking to someone and saying, I want that from you. No, be that person. So be compassionate, empathetic, be full of vision, be full of whatever the case might be. If you are that person, then by default, you'll start to lead others in that way. And hey, do that for a few years and you end up becoming a fantastic leader.
Good message. So probably time for one last question. A couple of questions ago, you said, 40-year-old you, if you were to look back at 20-year-old you, so take that scenario. What kind of advice would you have given, or what advice would you give yourself if you could meet yourself 20 years ago?
Oh, what advice would I give myself? I would say, don't try and draw meaning in the moment. So there's been many times where redundancy, for example, and in the moment I would just try and draw meaning. Well, it's got to be because of this, and it's got to be because of that, and it's got to be. And actually, I think sometimes you don't get clarity. It takes a year or two to get clarity. So I think patience is probably the first thing. Be patient. If you don't understand, try to live life embracing when you don't understand why. Try and find some comfort in that. So I think that would be the first thing I would say. Be patient, Ashton. You might not know the answer for a few years, and that's okay, but it will eventually come. Be patient. Never let the stupidity of other people steal your joy. You'll meet a lot of people along the way who, sadly, the world that we live in are in it for themselves, and they will use you as a pawn for their own gain. So, I think recognize that, but don't let that steal or rob your joy. Still be full of joy. Otherwise, you can grow cynical and bitter, and I've had that towards people. And what ends up happening with that is it robs you of your day-to-day fulfillment in your role, and they don't care. They're still cracking on using people for their personal gain. So you'll meet those people along the way, so don't let it steal your joy. And finally, I think, have a vision. Don't get lost on the conveyor belt of life. We're so stuck on head down, and what's next, what next. Spend an hour a week, lift your head up. Think about, where do I want to be in 5, 10, 15, 20 years, so that the decisions you make now aren't random. There's a bigger context in mind. And I look back, and there's been seasons of my life where I didn't have a vision. Where do I want to go? What do I want to do? And so as a result, my decisions were quite random.
Yeah, couldn't agree more with that one. That's like the importance of looking ahead, understanding, not to the finest detail, but understanding where you want to get to by which sort of points, and actually taking money out of the situation has always been important for me, because it's very easy to be like, oh, I want to get to this point financially, and then everything starts to steer around that. Well, actually, life is much more richer than that. There's way more that feeds into it. As you say, that's super interesting. Lots of insightful stuff there. And that's probably all about time for this one. So thanks very much for joining us.
Thank you.
Thanks for watching. For more content like this, don't forget to sign up to our newsletter, subscribe to our YouTube channel, and follow us on social.